name of the one who loves us, the one who saves us, and the one who spurs us ever on. Amen. Please be seated. Well, it is good to be back here with you this morning. As many of you know, over the last 2 weeks, I had the privilege of spending time in the Holy Land on pilgrimage. And in fact, I had the opportunity to actually drive through the town of Cana, where today's gospel story took place. And interestingly, there were lots of bridal shops, as well as purveyors of wine. I think what struck me most, though, about my time in the Holy Land, other than being able to walk in the footsteps of Jesus, was the number of barriers and walls that prevent people from making a living. Barriers that send messages that you don't belong here. Walls that deny opportunity. Walls that inflict shame. And I think even worse were the invisible walls of fear, of hatred, and unwillingness to see one another as fellow human beings. And I think in this morning's gospel, we see that Jesus understands the damages that these barriers and these walls, particularly the invisible ones, can inflict. You see, in the first century, Jewish weddings didn't happen in one day. They went on for as long as 7 days. And after the ceremony, all the guests went to the reception for days of partying where the bride and groom were expected to provide food and drink for everyone. You dads out there that are writing checks for wedding receptions, be grateful. You see, wine was also an important part of the celebration because it was a beverage of choice for all festive celebrations in the ancient world. Abundant wine was a symbol of the new age to come, as proclaimed by the Jewish prophets. And it symbolized blessing. And if it ran out before the celebration was over, it was not only a huge embarrassment for the bride and groom, but it was a social disaster for the entire family that they would have to live with for years and years to come. You see, the surrounding culture during Jesus' time was based on honor and shame. There was an extremely high emphasis on preserving honor and not being publicly disgraced. And so Jesus' mother, grasping the seriousness of the situation, she asks Jesus' help and instructs the servants to do as Jesus tells them. I think, though, that John may have left something out in that gospel. Because I think after Jesus says to his mother, "Woman, what does this have to do with us?" I think she gave him one of those mother stink eye looks and said, "Get to it." And so while he does acknowledge that his time has not yet come, Jesus chooses to honor his mother's request. And in doing that, he changes the reality of the situation. You see, Jesus doesn't just change a few small jars of water into wine. He provides an abundance of the finest wine. Those 6 water jars, stone water jars for Jewish purification, they held 20 to 30 gallons. That's about 1,000 bottles of wine. And it shows that God is doing something different and new among God's people. And so he demonstrates not only the abundance of God's blessing and the glory of God, he also makes believers of his disciples. And so this very first miracle of Jesus points to the extravagant abundance of God's love for and in the world. God's desire that none of us live in fear of shame or whatever walls we build that separate us from one another and from God. Jesus, in this first miracle, shows compassion and generosity when people are in need, and he models graciousness and reminds us the Christian life, like an amazing wedding feast, should be filled with joy and generosity and abundant living. Friends, that's the desire of God for all of his creatures. And it seems most appropriate that as we listen to this story of Jesus' first miracle, where he breaks down a wall, that we remember someone who worked tirelessly to ensure that abundant kind of life for others as well. On Monday, we honor the life of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy of working to break down walls and building bridges as Jesus did throughout his ministry. The unfinished work that as followers of Jesus in our baptism have promised to do, just as Dr. King did. And so this morning, I invite you to consider those walls in your own life that need to come down. Maybe it's a wall of fear or shame or unwillingness to forgive. Those walls in our common life that separate us from one another. Those places where we as individuals and as a nation view others as less than, for whatever reason that might be. So I share with you this morning the words of Dr. King as we decide how we want our futures to unfold. And this is from his speech where he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964. And please excuse some of the language because it is definitely, you can tell in the way that he uses gender in his terms. Sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace and thereby transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. And if this is to be achieved, man must evolve, for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggression, retaliation. And the foundation of such a method is love. I refuse to accept despair as the final response to the ambiguities of history. I refuse to accept the idea that man is mere flotsam and jetsam in the river of life, unable to influence the unfolding events which surround him. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, if temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. I believe even amid today's mortar bursts and whining bullets, there is still hope for a brighter tomorrow. I believe that wounded justice, lying prostrate on the blood-flowing streets of our nations, can be lifted from this dust of shame to reign supreme among the children of God. And I have the audacity to believe that peoples everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. And I believe that what self-centered men have torn down, men other-centered can build up. I still believe that one day mankind will bow before the altar of God and be crowned triumphant over war and bloodshed, and nonviolent redemptive goodwill proclaim the rule of the land. And the lion and the lamb shall lie down together, and every man shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and none shall be afraid. I still believe that we shall overcome. Brothers and sisters, Jesus came to pour grace and abundance on all of humanity, that we all might live rich, full, vivid, and sparkling lives. Jesus of Nazareth carried with him a joy and a spirit of celebration as he performed miracles at weddings, as people were cured of disease, as he ate meals with his followers and proclaimed a God of mercy, peace, justice, and joy. Jesus is present whenever and wherever there is a wall or a barrier, wherever there is a need within the human family. And so will you build walls or choose to tear them down? Will you meet God in unexpected places and faces as you become Christ for others? It's not that complicated. And unlike the wedding feast, doesn't require a miracle. Brothers and sisters, the choice is yours. And as Dr. King showed us, the difference in the world is transformational.